What if the greatest financial collapse of our generation wasn't caused by a sudden explosion, but by a quiet, collective delusion? The most important truth of the 2008 financial crisis is this. It didn't come from a single fraud, a rogue trader, or a one-time error. It came from a shared belief across homeowners, banks, Wall Street, and even governments that housing prices could only go up. That belief inflated a $20 trillion bubble in residential real estate. And when it popped, the world economy cracked open. People weren't just buying homes. They were using those homes like ATMs. Mortgages were written carelessly, sold up the food chain to investors who never looked twice. And at every level, from a family refinancing their home to the bankers packaging debt in fancy wrappers, there was blind faith in a system that, underneath, had stopped making sense. Warren Buffett saw it clearly. Everyone behaved badly, but they believed. It wasn't just greed. It was optimism turned dangerous. By 2008, 50 million out of 75 million owner-occupied homes in the U.S. were mortgaged. Many families were living not on their salaries, but on the expectation that their house would keep increasing in value. When that dream collapsed, it wiped out savings, destroyed jobs, and brought some of the most powerful institutions in the world to the edge of extinction. Yet here's the twist. Buffett wasn't worried. Why? Because he knew that the American economy would always have hiccups. That irrational euphoria followed by painful crashes was part of the system. And more importantly, he knew that during crises, the most important thing isn't prediction, it's adaptation. In the summer of 2008, Buffett received a call. One of Wall Street's top firms was trying to offload billions in Freddie Mac securities. Something was clearly wrong. Shortly after, Lehman Brothers reached out. They wanted a $3 to $5 billion investment. Their CEO, Dick Fuld, blamed short sellers. But Buffett, always cautious when blame gets deflected, asked one simple question. Tell me what you'll pay. He wasn't convinced. He went through hundreds of pages of Lehman's financials, scribbling red flags on every other page. It was not for us, he concluded. Then came AIG, a Friday night call, a desperate proposal, a $10 billion lifeline. Buffett said no. You see, even giants stumble. But Buffett knew the difference between trouble and ruin. He knew that when panic sets in, most people run blindly. He reads, at this point in the story, if you're learning something new, or if this perspective is helping you see past the headlines, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe. It helps us keep bringing deeper stories like this to you. By September 2008, everything was in free fall. Lehman Brothers filed for bankruptcy. Merrill Lynch was sold to Bank of America. AIG on the brink was rescued. The public was outraged. People were losing their homes while corporations got bailed out. And the architects of the bailout, Paulson, Bernanke, and Geithner, were under enormous pressure. Yet Buffett believed they were doing the right thing. They were rowing, he said. They didn't know if the boat was going to sink, but they were rowing. Goldman Sachs came next. They needed money and fast. And when Goldman calls Buffett, it's because they know something. He moves quickly when he sees value. Unlike speculators, Buffett isn't betting on hype. He's betting on fundamentals. That's why his phone kept ringing all through that September. In hindsight, some of the deals that got made, like Bank of America buying Merrill, were chaotic, expensive, and even reckless. But Buffett saw something others missed. He believed the entire financial system was standing at the edge of an economic Pearl Harbor. And in those moments, you don't debate, you act. One night, Buffett reviewed a 300-page document on Lehman. He marked every page with problems. He didn't have all the answers, but he had the wisdom to say no when things smelled wrong. This wasn't luck. This was discipline. Looking back, we have done things differently? Probably. We would have been better off if we waited 4 or 5 months to buy anything, he admitted. But in times of extreme uncertainty, even the best don't aim for perfect. They aim for survival. The lesson? In times of collective madness, you need clarity, not just data, but the courage to see the truth and act on it. That's what separates a smart investor from a crowd follower. Have you ever made a decision based on what everyone else was doing, only to regret it later? Think about it, and share your thoughts in the comments. It might help someone else recognize the signs of a bubble before it bursts. By the time the second week of September 2008 arrived, the world was unraveling. Lehman Brothers was gone. Merrill Lynch had vanished into the arms of Bank of America. AIG, once a giant among insurers, was gasping for air. The financial system was choking. But the real danger wasn't just in balance sheets. It was in confidence. Money moved the economy, but trust is what makes the money move. And when people stop believing that banks are safe, that money market funds are stable, and that tomorrow will be better than today, everything stops. Warren Buffett was watching closely, and he was alarmed. He described it later as an economic Pearl Harbor. That wasn't a phrase he used lightly. He meant it. It wasn't just about stocks falling. It was about fear spreading faster than logic. People who had never panicked before were suddenly making frantic calls. Even seasoned investors were asking questions like, is my money safe? Should I buy gold? What if the banks fail? And in a world addicted to leverage, fear is poison. Buffett knew that when everyone is trying to leverage, sell assets, pay off debt, reduce exposure, there has to be someone willing to do the opposite. That someone, he believed, was the government. Only a central actor like the U.S. Treasury or the Federal Reserve had the power to step in, inject liquidity, and restore trust. But there was a problem. Politics. The public was furious, bailing out Wall Street while ordinary families were losing homes and jobs felt like betrayal. Politicians knew that appearing soft on banks could cost them their seats. That's why every decision came with hesitation, debate, and backlash. And yet, the clock was ticking. Buffett had conversations with Hank Paulson, Ben Bernanke, and even President George W. Bush. Despite political risks, Buffett believed they were doing what had to be done. They didn't know if the boat was going to sink, he said, but they were rowing. He saw Bernanke as a calm, brilliant thinker, Paulson as a bold, principled operator, and Bush, whom Buffett had not supported politically, earned his respect for understanding the scale of the problem and giving his team room to act. But even then, panic was everywhere. Money market funds, once considered ultra-safe, were breaking the buck. Major institutions were being questioned by the hour. Would Goldman Sachs be next? What about Morgan Stanley? Was GE at risk? These weren't theoretical questions. They were existential ones. When Goldman Sachs reached out to Buffett, it wasn't just a financial play. It was a lifeline, a symbolic gesture that could restore faith. And Buffett agreed to invest. Because while others were frozen in fear, he was still willing to bet on American resilience. And that's the power of reputation. When Warren Buffett writes a check, it's not just money, it's belief. His investment told the world, I still believe in this system. And that belief became a spark, a small but vital signal that the system could be saved, not just with dollars, but with conviction. What followed were weeks of chaos, but also rebuilding. The Fed, Treasury, and Congress began putting together emergency measures. The $700 billion TARP program was launched. AIG was rescued. Banks were stress-tested. And the message was sent, we're not letting the system fall. Still, the public wasn't convinced. They wanted someone to blame, someone to punish. But as Buffett explained, this wasn't just a few bad actors. It was systemic. The belief in ever-rising housing prices had led homeowners to lie on mortgage applications, lenders to ignore risk, banks to offload bad debt, and investors around the world to buy toxic assets they didn't understand. And the reason they did it? Because it worked until it didn't. That's how bubbles form. Slowly at first, then suddenly, everyone does what works until it stops working. And by the time it breaks, the damage is already done. So, what can we learn from this? First, don't assume that crowds are wise. The fact that everyone is doing it doesn't make something safe. If anything, it might be a sign that risk is being ignored. Second, know the difference between price and value. A home priced at $800,000 might feel like a win today, but if it's based on debt and speculation, it can become a prison tomorrow. Third, prepare for fear. Because fear doesn't knock, it kicks the door in. And when it does, you'll either be the person who freezes or the one who acts with clarity. Before we move on, here's a simple thought to reflect on. What would you do in a financial storm? Would you be the one selling in panic, or the one buying with wisdom? Leave a comment sharing your perspective. How did the 2008 crisis affect your view of money, markets, or risk? Your insight might be exactly what someone else needs to hear right now. When the dust began to settle after the crisis, it wasn't just financial portfolios that had been shaken. It was the public's trust. Institutions once considered unshakable had crumbled. Government agencies had scrambled to act, and the very structure of capitalism had been questioned. And yet, out of the wreckage, the world moved forward. The United States didn't fall into a second Great Depression. The banks stabilized. Markets eventually recovered. Jobs returned. But the psychological imprint of 2008 was deep and long-lasting. Many people never looked at the stock market the same way again. Others swore off debt. Some became permanently cautious, fearful that another collapse was just around the corner. Warren Buffett, though, saw things differently. He never lost faith in the long-term trajectory of America. Yes, he admitted the mistakes. Yes, he called it an economic Pearl Harbor. But his core philosophy remained unchanged. Volatility is temporary. Progress is permanent. And he backed those words with action. Buffett didn't just write op-eds or give interviews. He invested billions during the darkest days. He looked where others were afraid to look. And because of that, Berkshire Hathaway emerged stronger. Not because of luck. Not because of timing. But because of preparation, discipline, and courage. So where does that leave us now? It leaves us with responsibility. We cannot predict the next crisis, but we can prepare for it. Not by memorizing stock tickers or chasing market trends, but by building financial principles that hold even when the ground shakes. Let's start with this. Don't be driven by envy. One of the key themes Buffett often returns to is the danger of comparison. The reason many people joined the real estate frenzy wasn't because they believed in the long-term fundamentals. It was because their neighbor got rich flipping a house. It was because someone they knew, someone less intelligent or capable, seemed to be winning at the game, and they weren't. That's how bubbles are born. Comparison breeds greed, and greed blinds reason. Second, understand what you own. Buffett has always emphasized investing only in what you deeply understand. During the lead-up to the 2008 crash, complex financial instruments like mortgage-backed securities and collateralized debt obligations became so convoluted that even professionals didn't fully understand what they held. In one case, Buffett examined a single structured security and discovered that to fully comprehend its risk, he would need to read over 300,000 pages of documents related to the underlying assets. Think about that. A financial product that required the equivalent of a full encyclopedia set to analyze, and yet people were buying them by the billions. Ignorance isn't bliss. It's danger in disguise. Third, respect the power of fear. Fear, unlike logic, spreads instantly. Confidence builds slowly, one fact at a time. But fear? It only takes a whisper to crash a market. In 2008, fear did what bad mortgages couldn't do alone. It triggered a domino effect. Everyone ran to the exits at once. Even the most intelligent, credentialed professionals acted emotionally. People sold what they should have held. They froze when they should have moved. So learn to manage your own fear. That's where true financial strength lies. Not in beating the market, but in staying calm when others can't. Finally, let's talk about the role of regulation and leadership. In the aftermath of the crisis, new laws like Dodd-Frank were introduced to prevent another collapse. But Buffett has expressed concern that some regulations may have weakened the Fed's ability to act swiftly in the next emergency. That's dangerous, because in a moment of crisis, speed matters more than theory. The ability to inject liquidity, restore confidence, and calm markets within hours, not days, is critical. A sluggish response could turn a manageable problem into a catastrophe. That's why, even now, Buffett argues for a strong, independent Federal Reserve with the tools and authority to act boldly when needed. The 2008 crisis wasn't caused by a single bad decision. It was a result of thousands of small, optimistic errors, all layered on top of one another. Home buyers overreached. Lenders ignored red flags. Banks passed the risk along. And everyone believed the same myth, that housing prices would never fall. But they did. And what followed wasn't just a financial correction. It was a societal moment of reckoning. So what is the real takeaway from all this? It's not just about avoiding risky mortgages or understanding how leverage works. The real lesson is this: be the kind of person who can think clearly in a storm. Build your life, your finances, and your mindset on principles that don't change when the winds do. Value discipline over hype, substance over flash, long-term resilience over short-term reward. Because storms will come again, not just in markets, but in life. And when they do, you'll want to be the kind of person who can step forward while others retreat. You want to be the one who says, "I've seen this before. I prepared for this. I'm not afraid." As we close, take a moment to share in the comments, what's the biggest financial lesson you've learned so far in your life? Whether it came from a win, a loss, or a close call, your experience might be the light someone else needs right now. And if you found value in this video, don't keep it to yourself. Pass it on. Someone out there might be one insight away from changing their financial future.